So again, a warm welcome to the second half of the conference, which is discussing energizing this post-COVID recovery, and linking it to the Sustainable Development Goals. So how we can support Sustainable Development Goals through maybe building better and planning the recovery in a sustainable way. So we have 3 panelists for our discussion today, and I thank them in advance because they have accepted the request and they are giving up their time for this conference, and I thank them very much because all of them I contacted on a very short notice. I think I contacted them in last 2 weeks time. So yeah, it's not very, I didn't give them a lot of advance notice. And all of them, they have agreed without any hesitation. So I think thank you very much. So we have 3 presenters, Dr. Rebecca Ford from University of Strathclyde, and we have Mr. Trevor Gibson from Opportunity Peterborough, and Ms. Catherine Enenkel from Center for Cities Organization. So 3 of them, they will be looking at, again, the same aspects of building back better, but from different angles, different perspectives. Rebecca will be looking at smart local energy leadership. Trevor will look at smart city leadership, and Catherine will look at building back better cities. So 3 different perspectives. Each of them will be presenting for 15 minutes. And then at the end of the 3rd presentation, we will have, we'll open it up for questions and answers. So please note your questions. You can put it in the chat so that we have them ready. And once the presentation is over, then we will take up the questions one by one. You can have questions for all 3 of them, or you can indicate your questions as you wish. So I will now hand it over to Rebecca first for her presentation. And yeah, I request everybody to mute the microphone so that there is no feedback. Yeah, so Rebecca, go ahead, please.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And let me just try and share my screen. So I'll ask you to give me some feedback as to whether you can now see the
yes.
slides.
Yeah, slides are fine.
Fantastic. So today I'm going to be talking about smart local energy systems and post-COVID recovery, and I'm really pleased to be able to come and talk today. And I'm going to be talking not just drawing on my expertise from the University of Strathclyde, but also on some of the wider insights that are emerging from the Energy Rev Research Consortium as well. And I think importantly, I want to make sure I contextualize this by making sure that I'm focusing on not just post-COVID recovery and smart local energy systems, but as noted through the title of this conference, how they can support the Sustainable Development Goals as well. And my talk's not going to focus on all of these, but I am going to look at how smart local energy systems and the role for local energy leadership aligns with some of these goals, particularly goals 7 and 13, and looking at the decarbonisation of energy systems to deliver net zero. And also, like, if we do this well, the opportunities to support progress against the number of these other goals. And you know, for the work that I've been looking at, what this means is we're talking about post-COVID economic recovery, but we're going way beyond just the economic outcomes and indicators, and thinking about things like, you know, in a smart local energy system lens, clean energy and greenhouse gas emission reductions, energy bill reductions and reductions in fuel poverty, as well as, I guess, more broader outcomes like prosperous and resilient communities with new sorts of systems that embed social equity and energy justice. As part of that, we're also talking about the growth of decent jobs in clean energy industries, as well as other environmental outcomes and health outcomes like biodiversity gains and cleaner air and health benefits in those communities. So what I'm really going to try and do is spend the next probably 10 to 15 minutes or so talking about how and why I believe that smart local energy systems and local leadership is absolutely critical if we want to unlock this diversity of outcomes alongside the post-pandemic economic recovery. And I should say, there we go, that many of the insights that I'm going to be sharing are drawn from a report that we published as EnergyRev toward the end of last year. And in the report we published, and I've put the web address along the side, so when you circulate these slides, you'll be able to access it. We looked at some of the key changes that are required to deliver a green recovery, but very much placing the attainment of net zero at the heart of a lot of these investments. And in fact, since we published this report, the CCC has published the 6th carbon budget, and we've also seen the release of the energy white paper. And I think, you know, looking across these policy documents, what's become very clear is that to deliver a green recovery aligned with net zero, action is required across 4 key areas. And I'll just talk a little bit about those 4 key areas. So the first is around improving the energy efficiency of our built environment, and that's both existing and new. So reducing the need for investment in energy supply and the carbon emissions. But aside from that, it's actually just good value for money. So a study that we talk about in our report showed that for every £1 spent on energy efficiency, you could increase GDP by £3.20. And alongside those economic outputs, you also have a whole raft of co-benefits, particularly related to health, and then the knock-on impacts, financial impacts on savings to the NHS. On top of that, you've got opportunities for job creation because there are a lot of buildings that need insulating. So huge area for investment. Related to this is low carbon heating and cooling systems. And so heating accounts for about 1/3 of our carbon emissions in the UK. So it's a really important sector to decarbonise. And of course, it's very, very closely linked to energy efficiency. The more efficient our buildings are, the easier it is to decarbonise our heating and cooling systems. So actually making sure that these 2 areas are well aligned is absolutely critical. So thinking about how we coordinate things like the skills, the jobs, the supply chain, and the project delivery to make this happen. And by coordinating across them, we can get the biggest bang for our stimulus buck. The third area is low carbon mobility, and that's things like electric vehicles, as well as active and public travel infrastructure. And transport's actually the largest source of our carbon emissions in the UK. And in fact, many of the measures that could be implemented, which need to be implemented at the local level, can deliver a multitude of health and well-being benefits, not just cleaner air, but also the benefits through engaged in more active and public transport. And finally, investment in energy infrastructure and electricity generation. So a lot of the things we've been talking about, including the electrification of heat and transport, will increase electricity demand and increase the demands on our networks, not just at the transmission level, but at increasingly local levels. And actually, thinking about it at a local level, a lot of these projects have the opportunity to boost supply chain development and local jobs. And in fact, per unit of energy, renewable energy technologies are more labour intensive than fossil fuels, so more job creation potential there as well. And through our work, what we've tried to highlight is that actually, when you look at these measures that are needed, by taking a smart local energy system approach and driving local energy leadership, you have the opportunity to unlock, amplify and enhance post-pandemic outcomes for 6 reasons that we've encapsulated in what we've called our smart local energy system prism. And I'm going to talk about these 6 very briefly now. So the first is local knowledge. Working through local authorities and other local actors can really help you target interventions to where they're most needed. And it can also help support the development and the direction of local supply chains. So really supporting that targeted action, not just for those who need it most, but also in connecting across the whole supply chain. And I think we're seeing increasingly local authorities engage not just in kind of their own climate agendas and action plans, but also in local energy system projects. And so that's a real opportunity to support more inclusive participation and get things out to exactly where they're needed in their communities, because they know their communities the best. Very much aligned with this is engagement and trust, because those sorts of local actors, particularly when you start to bring in leadership with local community groups and have local community groups, charities, NGOs working alongside local authorities, you start to build trust and you start to engage actors and organizations that are trusted by the community. And these organizations are better placed to stimulate wider engagement. They can also better represent the views of local citizens and the local community, making sure their voices are heard. And that can really help not just widen access and participation, but also make sure that some of the challenges, constraints, and the outcomes that you want to achieve are much better integrated into the community. The third reason is around planning. And looking just across the energy sector and the changes that are required, I mean, I think for me, it's very clear that those 4 key areas where investment is needed in building efficiency, decarbonisation of heating and transport, and electricity grids, there's a huge amount of integration there and codependencies. And so making sure we can think about how do you integrate things like the skills, the supply chains, and the planning requirements around coordinating this activity, and I think that really becomes very tangible when you think about do we need to dig up the roads, and how do we make sure that we only do this once, and that we coordinate the activity amongst the diversity of stakeholders involved to minimize the costs of the required changes. And so making sure that coordination effectively happens with all these different stakeholders can help ensure that things like upgrades or further on costs could be avoided or deferred. And finally, local coordination can help reduce risks that individual businesses might make or householders could make. For example, preventing householders installing, expensive heat pumps in an area where a heat network might be planned. So really thinking about coordination across a variety of scales. The fourth reason is around co-benefits, and I think that when you look at at these smart local energy systems from a national level, you can often discount some of the real impacts that they're having. But when you start to look at it more locally, you can really start to see through a lot of these interconnections some of the tangible benefits. So, for example, providing warmer homes for people that might be in more vulnerable circumstances could directly feed into reductions of care-related costs, which might be borne by local authorities. And the same goes for things around, promoting active transport. So by doing that in a coordinated way, really engaging with the local community, you could really start to reduce some of the health impacts of air pollutions, reduce town centre congestion, start to benefit local businesses and so on. And so focusing in on the local level means you can really start to exploit some of these benefits all the way from the planning stage through to the implementation. The next reason is economic development. And I think often when we look at policies from a national level, there can be a number of institutional barriers that stand in the way of realizing some of the financial incentives and those sorts of mechanisms to stimulate recovery. And actually, when you start to think about this at a local level, you can see how local action might be able to help overcome that. So as a really kind of base example, I'd like to reflect on the Green Homes Grant Scheme, which is, I guess, no longer in the same way that it was initially. And actually access to that was more likely to be determined by whether you could get an available and approved supplier than by targeted assessment of where the biggest economic, environmental and social benefits could be delivered. We could also look back at the feed-in tariff scheme and see similar outcomes in that whilst on the one hand it supported the uptake of solar PV, it also widened socioeconomic inequalities. And actually, when you look at local action in that area. So when there were local and community energy schemes that started to address some of those socioeconomic impacts, or adverse impacts. And so really by engaging and taking that local focus, aligning these national incentives with local energy plans and strategies can help overcome some of the structural barriers that might be embedded at the national level. Scaling up is the next thing I want to talk about, and this actually, I guess, more relates to the smart side of smart local energy. I'm really focusing on developing smart, customizable and interoperable digital products and services can make those solutions far more replicable and investable, both within the UK and as an export opportunity. So really thinking about how we are being smart in the application of local energy system solutions is absolutely critical to think about capitalizing on the wider rollout of these sorts of offerings as well. However, there are a number of non-trivial challenges to overcome, and I'm just going to highlight 3 of them, and perhaps we'll hear more about them from the coming speakers. And I think the first one to note is that often local authorities are seen as the kind of pivotal community through which a number of these projects and initiatives can be taken forward, but actually they have limited capacity, resources and limited accountability. So a number of national targets have not been devolved to regional or local levels. And that means that you might see tensions between some of the trade-offs of factors that are important and accountable for at the local or regional level with those at the national level. The second thing is that I don't think we're getting good enough alignment across governance scales at the moment. So, for example, take heating as an example. Right now, I think a lot of the onus is on households to take action and to, capitalize on national level grants to replace heating systems. But actually, the supply chain isn't there. Financial support isn't there. And also, we'll just see those that have the skills and resources to make the change doing so, leaving others behind. And whilst social housing innovation through local authorities can help, it's not enough. And, that's just focusing on housing. What about the other sectors as well? So I think we need to focus on much better alignment across different governance scales. And finally, I think we're starting to do a lot better at engaging citizens and communities, which is key because a lot of the changes to come are really going to be felt by people in their day-to-day lives. But I don't think we're doing enough right now. I see at the moment generally what's happening is we're just trying to design better customer propositions. But I think we need to go a lot further with meaningful participation, co-creation, ownership, and places and cities are the ideal places to engage meaningfully with the wider community and citizen groups. And so I think that's the end of my slides, actually. So I'm going to pause there, but really looking forward to the questions and panel discussion later on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca, for your interesting presentation. I think you have touched on many areas, and it will give rise to a number of issues and for discussion. So yeah, please start noting down your questions and comments in the chat box, and then we will move to the presentation from Trevor. So Trevor, you can share and start your presentation, please.
Okay, thank you. Check you can see the screen. Can everybody see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. Thanks for the invitation as well to speak today, and again, very much interested in the other topics being covered, and indeed the questions and discussion later. My name's Trevor Gibson from Opportunity Peterborough, and just a little bit of background. Opportunity Peterborough is the economic development company for the city of Peterborough, not far from Leicester, as we were discussing earlier. The company itself is not for profit. It's owned entirely by Peterborough City Council, so they are our only shareholder, and essentially we carry out the economic development functions for the city. So my focus today is more about that economic development at a city scale and the sorts of support we can bring to bear with businesses and indeed other organisations across the city. Obviously, energy efficiency and so on is very much part of that, but this is a more general presentation, if you like. First of all, for those that don't know Peterborough, it's just a few facts and figures here. Massive regeneration going on at the moment, very diverse economy, big focus on sustainability, particularly circular city through our Circular Peterborough initiative. We're one of the UK's 4 Future City demonstrators. That's a status that goes back to Innovate UK back in 2012, 2013. One of the fastest growing cities in the UK, and probably not to compete with De Montfort, but we do have a new university opening in 2022. Peterborough's the largest city in the UK without a university, which is not a good statistic, but may as well be honest. Okay. Like all cities, not just in the UK, but across the world, really, cities face a huge number of interrelated challenges that are very complex, often very costly to address, often include engagement with a massive range of stakeholders, even in a small city like Peterborough. So, you know, this complexity, you know, continues as the years go by, and on top of all that, we've now got COVID-19. So it really has an impact on every single challenge that we're trying to address as a city, whether that's climate change, dealing with the aging population, healthcare, job retention, and so on. It is a massive change, and one that we need to take into account. Just a little bit of obviously context, COVID context, which, as I say, virtually every event, meeting, discussion I attend now, it comes up somewhere inevitably, and you know, it's worth addressing it head on in a way. It's certainly been a massive shock to our social and economic systems. There have been obviously some environmental benefits, and I'll come back to a little bit on how we support that later. And I think probably one of the biggest takeaways, you know, aside from all the tragedy and so on, which is obviously always going to be there, but the ability of a nation, not just England, but ability of a nation to implement change rapidly, you know, things that we're taking in a smart city context, digitization and so on, things that were taking years, sometimes decades to be tested, rolled out, adjusted to make them work better, literally had to happen within weeks, if not months. So again, there's a learning there that things are possible. We can change things rapidly, and probably post-COVID we need to. From my perspective, looking at Circular Peterborough, it was very clear on the news, from things like PPE to ventilators, that we have a very vulnerable, complex and lengthy supply chain. And there's something there that, again, we need to learn in building resilience into our economy and into our cities, that can't happen again. You know, we have to be better prepared next time. We have to know that we can get hold of critical supplies when we need them, not waiting for them to travel halfway around the world. So as I mentioned previously, I think there's a need to capture the learning and rebuild the economy so it becomes more sustainable in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, and more resilient. And I think that last point, which I'll return to throughout the presentation, I think is a key one, often overlooked. We can rebuild the economy, but in rebuilding it, it really needs to be more sustainable, and it needs to be resilient to future shocks, wherever they come from, because I think we all know there will be shocks at some point. Just going back to the next slide. we've got just my really outline of what smarter cities are about from my perspective working in Peterborough. I think a smart city is a city that embraces new technology, Industry 4.0. It develops cross-cutting solutions, so tries to break down the silos which are inevitable in any city when developing challenges by developing solutions that hit more than one challenge if they possibly can. And that often takes collaboration both within the city and between cities and other organizations. I think a smart city learns from and applies best practice, so it's open to learning, it's comfortable to take risks and fail occasionally, and it uses technology and data where they will have the greatest impact on people's lives. And I always stress that being smart is not always about leaping to a technological solution. Sometimes, and I think COVID has been an example of this, sometimes just working better together, human systems, is the answer. It doesn't always need a complex and often expensive digital solution. I think smart cities also harness and embrace the networks and communities that they already have. They capitalize on those, and that's often easier in a smaller city than it is in a great metropolis like London, Manchester, Birmingham, and so on. So again, something to bear in mind there. Our smart city journey, just very briefly, I mentioned that we became one of 4 Innovate UK future city demonstrators back in 2012, 2013. We developed the Peterborough DNA project. We now call it the Future Peterborough programme. It was launched around the same time, and it's jointly led by Opportunity Peterborough and Peterborough City Council. It's generated over the years new business opportunities, small entrepreneurs developing new ideas, new solutions. We've developed environmental projects such as the Circular Peterborough Initiative and the Share Peterborough digital platform. And we've tried to inspire disconnected people. We're building skills for local citizens and so on. And skills is not something I'm going to talk about in particular, but I will refer to it later on. We've also explored, where possible, new technologies and interventions. I'm sure you're all well aware of the concept of Industry 4.0, but just as a quick reminder, I won't go through these, but everything from Internet of Things to robots to machine learning and so on. We think all of these things have a really key part in developing the economy and building that resilience and sustainability. We've been part of a European project for a number of years now. It actually ends later this year, although there might be an extension, again, arising from COVID and the inability to run the workshops that were required as part of the project. But this is a project where we're partnered in the UK with Anglia Ruskin University. You can see the partners on the screenshot on the right. And basically what the project endeavours to do is to build competencies through a range of tools aimed at manufacturing SMEs in the first instance to help them develop their productivity in a sustainable and resilient way. So we're aiming to raise the level of information, providing support that we've identified that business needs, and establishing strong partnerships across the manufacturing industry around these new technologies, and really trying to shift the economy of the city forward at a greater pace. These were all things that were, this and the next project, they're all things that were planned before COVID-19, and actually their importance in terms of the support they provide for businesses has just raised in importance as a result of the pandemic. Early research into as part of Growing really shows again that the challenges that businesses are facing, they really lack we're talking about small businesses primarily here, lack that tailored support that they need to get into this world of technology. It's finding the space, if you like, to think about and plan some of these, look at options appraisals for the different approaches. There's often, particularly evident now, I would imagine, is caution and risk averse. Businesses are, basically trying to keep their head above water post-COVID. Those that manage to get through it, they don't always have the right skills and competencies for looking at this sort of technology. They have concerns about data leakages, cybersecurity, and so on. They lack resources, a common factor across most organizations and sectors, and they lack the right business tools. But the common opportunities that were identified and recognized by businesses was that increased productivity that could be gained, building that competitiveness and growing their business. The tools back in December of last year, again, I'm not going to through them, but these are the tools that were developed as part of the program. We're shortlisting those at the moment, so they'll to a list of about 5 or 6, I believe, and they will be published, made available digitally to help businesses find their way through the complexity of Industry 4.0 and new technologies. I've just picked out an example there of benefits identification and tracking as a particular tool, and basically that, just as an example, helps businesses look at the benefits they could gain from the adoption of new technology, and also enables them to track those and get maximum benefit from them. It supports decision making right at the outset, and also enables and suggests ways in which resources can be reallocated, work activities redesigned, and so on. So a really powerful tool there. And as I say, there's many others which I could go through. So I keep flipping screens. We recently, or we're about to launch something called the Smart Manufacturers Alliance in Peterborough, again providing that focus for business support. This is across Peterborough and Cambridgeshire. And we're looking at the city from again a manufacturing process, which is a particular aspect of the city we want to drive. Startup city, so a city that's encouraging entrepreneurs to bring about their own companies, their startup companies. A growing city, so looking at businesses that are already here and how we support them in building on their success and growing further. A productive city, looking at a city that designs, innovates, and builds. An innovation city, a city where new ideas are welcomed and tested. An international city, so sharing our expertise and experience internationally, and also learning. As I said earlier, a smart city is one that is open to learning from around the world. And then a talented city, all of the above, requires a whole range of skills, in many ways very different from the skills that young people are equipped with today. The approach we've developed for the Smart Manufacturing Alliance, again, fairly straightforward one really, from a short online diagnostic through to training and on to specific expertise and consultancy support and advice. So just my closing remarks. I think Industry 4.0 is a really crucial part of being a smart city, but it's not always about the technology. It's about working smarter through the human connections, as I mentioned previously. I think it's one of the key components, perhaps one of the most important components of rapid and responsible, and by that I mean sustainable, in sustainability terms, economic development. But it's clear that businesses require accessible, targeted support in order to overcome some of their caution, resistance, and so on, and look at some of the challenges they face in working their way through this complex world. There's a key need to share experiences both within the city, but nationally and international, if we're to do this at pace. And I think post-COVID-19 smart city approaches, smart city leadership can clearly support the development of more efficient and more sustainable, and perhaps most critically, given what's just happened and the recovery we're working our way through at the moment, more resilient economy, both locally, nationally, and globally. So that's all what I wanted to say. If there's time in the discussion, there is quite a lot we're doing around smart city skills through something we called our Inspire series, but it depends which way the discussion goes as we get into that. So thank you very much for, again, the opportunity to speak today. I look forward to the question and discussions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. So again, please note down your questions and comments in the chat box, and we will take them up after the third presentation. And I'm very impressed that both of you have managed the time very well. So you have finished within the allowed 10 minutes. That's very, very impressive. So yeah, our next speaker is Catherine Henkel from Center for Cities Organization. So the floor is yours, Catherine. Yes, you can see your slides.
Sorry, one moment. Okay. First, thank you for the invitation to speak here. I come from a very different perspective than the other participants we've heard so far. So I'm from the Center for Cities, and at the Center for Cities, we look at the competitiveness and economics as well as social indicators of the UK's 63 largest cities and towns. And yeah, we make assessments, and when we think about building better or leveling up, for sure, we also think somehow about energy and also productivity, like smart cities, but also in the main focus is productivity. And I think my contribution here to this discussion round is to give like a view on a lot of all the cities of the UK, and like to emphasize like what important role they will play in a building back better, or also in leveling up, this phrase now very often used by the government. Okay, so when we talk about leveling up or building back better, we have to think about, okay, what do we actually want to level up or build back better? And there's a range of indicators, and I'm not looking at energy or smart cities in my presentation. I'm rather looking at indicators which are very much in mind when talking about leveling up in other spheres. So what we can see here is a map for the UK for 3 indicators. We have skills, health, and productivity. And we can see that there is a large variation across these indicators across the country. And so when we think about building back better or leveling up, so the gut reaction seeing this map is actually, probably we should get rid of the variation. So everywhere in the UK should be dark green. And I think then we must think about that it's actually not possible for all of these indicators. So it can be possible and should be possible for skills and health. There is no reason or justification why people in Grimsby would have a worse health than a person in Reading. But it will be difficult to expect that all places across the UK can have or achieve actually the same productivity. So the map at the very right. So we cannot expect that a rural place, somewhere in Wales, has actually the same productivity than central Manchester. So for productivity, we have to expect a variation across the country because places have very different productivity potential. So, but the divide should not be between the north and the south, but we can expect there is a divide between cities and non-cities, and this is the contribution cities must make in the recovery period because the UK has such a productivity problem, and cities play a very important role. So when it comes up to leveling up productivity, it is, as I already said, particularly cities and the centres which have a very high potential to be productive because there are attractive for a certain set of productive firms. As you can see on the left side, cities and their centers are important because of learning. They have a density and give businesses the ability to exchange ideas and information. That's also called knowledge spillovers. Sharing city centers and the cities give the ability to share inputs, supply chains, be it like an infrastructure like office buildings, metro lines, etc. And third, matching, businesses get access to the deep pool of workers with the relevant skills. And for that reasons, in the past, we could actually see that a lot of productive businesses are clustering in cities. And this is why cities play such an important role when we think about leveling up or building back better productivity after the crisis. So yeah, but the question is like, why am I talking about this in the framework of leveling up? So the problem is that currently in the UK, cities outside of the Greater Southeast do not follow this theory I've just mentioned. So you can see here that the productivity by 3 different geographies from for the Greater Southeast on the left and elsewhere in Great Britain on the right. And you can also see that productivity in rural areas in the Greater Southeast and outside of the Greater Southeast is quite similar. It cannot be said for cities. So cities in the Greater Southeast are much more productive than elsewhere in Britain. And this is particularly the point where we need to level up and to build back better and to really channel the energy when it comes to making improvements in productivity. And yeah, the burst performer, or like the drivers of that, are actually large cities. So it's not only a problem that cities in general outside of the Greater Southeast are underperforming, it's particularly a problem that the biggest cities in the UK are underperforming. So we know from other research, for instance, that the productivity of a city should increase with its size. It's basically because of the reasons I've mentioned in the beginning, the 3 points. And we can see this in the US, in Germany, and also in France. But here you can see that in this figure, which is looking at the relationship between city size and its productivity, where in a perfect world, all cities would or should sit on the line, which is the expected productivity. It is particularly Manchester and Birmingham that are underperforming. And there's actually no reason why Manchester and Birmingham should be less productive than their international counterparts in Germany, Cologne or Frankfurt, or also in France, like Toulouse. And because of this underperformance and the cities not performing as we would expect them to perform, the economy is around 83 billion smaller per year. So if you would do the analysis from the previous slide for all places in the UK, large cities, smaller cities, and non-urban places like smaller towns, you would actually come to the result that due to places not performing as they potentially could, the underperformance of the entire economy is around 83 billion pounds smaller per year. And the largest share of the underperformance, it's actually coming from large cities. And you can see here that the 8 largest underperforming cities account for almost 50 billion of the productivity loss. So, and in percentages, that it's more than half of the lost potential, despite larger cities in question only cover 7% of land outside of the Greater Southeast. So that means that we will not be able to level up or building up the economy or to build back better unless we tackle the underperformance of the biggest cities, and particularly Manchester and Birmingham and Glasgow. Oops. And so what we would ask from policy when it comes to the question of leveling up and channeling energy to building back better with regards to the indicators I've just mentioned, we would ask them to include the following goals in any strategy. First, like reducing the share of people without the equivalent of 5 good GCSEs to the national average in every local authority that currently sits above it. Increase the life expectancy to the national average in every local authority that currently sits below it, and bring all lagging places up to the productivity potential. And the particular focus should be on the contribution of the UK largest cities. So when we then look at how policy and geography should interact, is that skills in improving the quality of public services should be addressed in all 4 geographies, so deep rural, city surrounds, city suburbs, and city centers, and improving access to jobs there where it's possible around cities, city suburbs, city centers, and then focusing on productivity in particularly in cities. And the policy areas we would recommend or we expect to deliver on these goals are first skills. We would ask, improve basic skills and intermediate skills, because there we can see the UK is particularly lagging behind, and skills are very strong predictor of employment outcomes across the country, be this in cities and in towns. Then devolution, so devolve more powers to reformed local government. Much of the policy that will help deliver leveling up or building back better, actually, like local transport and planning, can probably be better delivered at the local level. Then improve the public services provision, and that means all the things which have impact on people's day-to-day lives, be it like, I don't know, after school meeting points for youngsters, etc., but also like the delivery or like addressing all the health problems we've seen in the previous slides. And strengthen local transport, linking people to jobs, and also making city centers more attractive places to do business. This can happen on a lot of different levels. I think a lot of things Trevor mentioned make sense in that sense, and I think this is why it is a smart city and never like a smart rural area. Like all these different stakeholders coming together there, transport playing a role also, like smart city approaches would be one way to improve or to focus on productivity on cities. Yeah, I think that was it from my side. If you had asked me 2 weeks later, I could have presented something just on cities and decarbonization, but our report is not published yet. So maybe the next time there will also be something very interesting about decarbonization from the Center for Cities. Thank you.
Okay, that's very good. Again, thank you very much. So yeah, we have completed 3 presentations within the time limit, so that's very, very impressive. Now, yeah, the floor is open for comments and discussion. Anyone who would like to first raise the question? I've not seen any questions in the chat box, so yeah, you can raise your hand and you can start asking the questions directly, please. Yeah, Rick, please.
Hi, hi everybody. 3 really good presentations. Thank you very much for those. That's great. I have a question for Rebecca. I'm just going to scroll back up so I don't forget exactly what I had in my head. Oh yeah. It seems to me that a lot of the post-pandemic solutions that we see being written about and spoken about are likely to be contested. Particularly because one of the things we've all done during the pandemic is argue with each other on Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that. So the contests are getting a bit more aggressive and unpleasant, I think. Have you any advice for a forum where these debates can take place in a sort of a helpful and non-aggressive way? So that, for example, one that's popular locally in the newspaper website is cyclists within Leicester. The City Council is trying to promote cycling, which personally I'm very, very in favour of. But there's a lot of people in Leicester who are not in favour of it, and they get very angry and ranty on the newspaper website. So it's clearly an issue that the council has to somehow find a way to handle. How would they do it in a democratic way so that everybody feels they've at least had a chance to make their opinion heard?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I don't know that I'm totally the expert to answer this, but I'll share kind of a few thoughts. And I have colleagues that have been involved in both in UK Climate Assembly and also more local citizen assemblies, citizen juries. And I think that some of the processes that are implemented there can provide a useful forum for less heated discussions about some of the key issues to help co-create a vision of what what that city or what that place could look like. Obviously, you know, UK wide, you can't get into some of the nitty gritty and the details that you were talking about, but certainly in more place-based versions, you are able to do that. And actually, I was recently made aware of something that was happening in Japan, Japan's future design movement. And they used principles that actually I think started in Native America using, it's called like 7th generation decision-making principles. And they encourage participants of this to actually put themselves in a different mindset. So they're bringing a different perspective to the conversation and actually thinking not just about the immediate and often difficult issues that they might be in kind of the headspace of like right now, but actually to start thinking in a slightly more long-term basis of what could be more broadly beneficial. So I think spaces like that can be quite useful to support kind of discussion around these issues. But I also think, and I just want to tie this together with, because I know there were quite a few questions coming in, and I think one of the big challenges, and probably one of the reasons why there are all of these, you know, maybe not the example you gave, because I think, you know, that's not a kind of either or, if you like, but I think in your question on the chat, you sort of raised some either or around like heating technologies and so on. And I think part of the issue is that we don't have that kind of leadership from either national or local levels. And I think at the moment that's largely national level and national direction, but obviously local climate strategies and policies, some areas are more advanced than others in terms of setting those agendas and the more detailed plans, others are getting there. But I think without the vision for what that's going to look like and the longer term investment signals, it's harder to get kind of that coordinated buy-in as well. So I think they're both issues. At the moment, we're having this discussion because we lack the leadership in some areas, and in other areas, you're right, we're so focused on kind of like specific issues and problems that we might not be in the right mindset to have that more clearer debate with those longer term goals in mind.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, Mark, if you go ahead with your question, please.
Yeah, thanks, Suresh, and thanks for 3 excellent presentations. Hi, Trevor again. Well, hi, Trevor. Yeah, I've got two questions that I put on the chat, which start with a sort of academic concept, really, but I think that are relevant to your presentations. The first relates to the concept of the rebound effect, and if we start, you know, there are many changes that we introduce that may certainly in the short term have almost a counterproductive impact. Do you think this is a relevant concept, and possibly how do we address it? For example, energy efficiency may well lead to using more energy, particularly for those who are suffering energy or experiencing energy poverty. And the second part to the question, I suppose, comes out of that, which is the concept of redundancy, and how do we actually identify what are appropriate resources that aren't immediately useful, but may be fundamental to help us address the resilience that Trevor particularly mentioned. How do we make those decisions? How do we move forward to identifying what sorts of resources we need to put in to put on the back burner just in case?
Should I start on that one? Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that, Mark, and hi again. Some really important points there, and I think probably covered in all 3 presentations in different ways. If I pick up the first point, one of the big issues I always have when we look at economic development is that the pure economic development professionals, I think it is changing, tend to look at you know, industry 4.0 equals productivity, therefore is a good thing, and that's going to drive the economy. And that's probably how it used to be. It's still evident in some people I speak to. but you can't look at things any longer. What's become very clear is you can't look at things in those isolated ways any longer. And so, you know, to pick up your example or a similar example to the one you described there about energy efficiency, increasing the number of robots on a production line is probably going to reduce the number of jobs in the factory, and plugging 50 machines in may well increase the energy requirements. So productivity is increased, but at the expense of some negative social and environmental impacts. And those considerations are hugely complex, I think, because again, I was having this conversation with somebody the other week who said, "Oh yeah, but you're using more energy in your production line because you've got all of your machines plugged in, but you now haven't got all of those employees jumping in their cars and driving through the city centre to get to work. So you can't sort of separate things out." So I think there's a huge amount of work to do there in terms of how we break down some of that complexity so that we know we're making the right decisions. And you know, it needs a bigger brain than mine in a way to do some of that. I think the key message, and this is the change that's happening in my world anyway, is that you don't take decisions any longer without considering the impacts. And that's what's so powerful about the Sustainable Development Goals. When you see, you know, people think, well, it's about environment, it's about sustainability, green spaces, trees, air quality. But when you look at the connections, the wiring diagram behind the Sustainable Development Goals, you know, the impact it has on, you know, on jobs, on poverty, on food and everything else. You know, I think that has to be the mantra, really. It should be taught in schools so that young people understand that complexity as best they can from a young age. And maybe that way we start to change things. The redundancy one is also an interesting one, and I'm not sure I've got an answer or a short answer to that either. I think that's very complex. It's about having a better understanding of, if you take a city, a more granular understanding of the city, learning from you know, past experiences and shocks to the system, like COVID. You know, what can we learn there? What things caught us out? What things can we capture and store and improve, ready for next time? You know, I think again, there's a whole amount of work that can be done there. My fear is that we're focusing on rebuilding the economy without capturing that learning, because there's an urgency about it all, obviously. We're moving forward rapidly, and I just fear that we might end up going back to where we were, and the same shock will knock us off track again if we're not careful. So the you know, business as usual is probably not the way forward now. Don't know if that helps. Thanks.
Can I jump in on top of some of the things you said? And I mean, I love the fact, Trevor, that you talked about like that kind of idea of thinking about the bigger system, because, you know, you can't just think about one change. There are these knock-on effects. And for me, it's also about the multiplicity of outcomes that we're trying to achieve, because it's not just net zero. There are a huge amount of social goals. And taking the example that you gave, Mark, I don't think if people are living in fuel poverty, you absolutely, you know, and using more is not an issue. Like, that's probably a good thing, because, you know, that's another really important thing to be doing, is to enabling people to be warm in their homes. I mean, coming to what you were saying, Trevor, that's probably going to have knock-on impacts on health and fewer hospital visits and so on. But I think, you know, for me, it's also about making sure that we are recognizing and building in these multiple outcomes into our tracking systems and learning about them. And actually, I want to reflect on the word learning. And actually, again, Trevor, you said this during your presentation. You talked about failing and learning. And for me, I used to think about the concept of redundancy, and now I think more about the concept of flexibility and adaptability. And I think traditionally, particularly when you look at innovation projects or demonstration projects that are starting to take us down this route, we see, I mean, still the mindset is evaluation at the end of the program. Did it do what it said it was going to do, or did it fail? And we're still in this kind of like pass or fail mode. And we're scared talk about things that don't work, but actually we need to be learning about them. We need to be failing fast and iterating and improving, and that requires a completely different mindset, not just from the people that are delivering things and what we're measuring, but also from funders that are supporting all of this, so that we're not scared to fail. And it requires entirely new forms of collaboration, because to fail, you need to be able to trust the people that you're working with and the partnerships that you have. And so I think talking about redundancy is very difficult, because it requires almost a kind of predicting what the future could look like and what we could need, whereas focusing more on like changing our approach to delivering these changes and changing that the ability to fail, iterate, improve, and rapidly change. For me, that's absolutely critical if we're going to address any of these issues in the time frame that we've got.
But at the same, I think at the same time, when you are trying to build something better for resilience, whenever there is some redundancy, we should be able to then recapitalize on that and channelize it in a different way, so that it becomes useful for a productive economic development and maybe social and sustainable community development as well. So I think it goes back there. Yes, there is nothing is static. So things are dynamic, changing over time, and as a result, as we are negotiating that process of a changing world, there will be cases where resources would be redundant. They would not have the same purpose as they had before. So we have to repurpose them, and that there lies the link to the skills. So the idea that you are talking about the skills, developing the skills from an early stage, and then adapting it to and making that flexible, I think is very important there. So it all comes back, and there is that circularity there, I think, which is very important for both leveling up, for also creating that resilient and sustainable society. And I think, that's very, very good. Now, Rick has got a question for Trevor. He's asking if you can explain a little bit about circular Peterborough.
I'll be very brief, because I'm sure that there's lots of other things as well, and it's sort of a topic on its own, circular economy. But again, looking at how you build an economy in a sustainable and resilient way, we decided many years ago now that we would focus on looking at circularity at a city scale and aiming to create a circular city. If I'm brutally honest, I don't think anybody really knows what a circular city would look like should anybody actually get there. We wouldn't be drinking coffee and eating bananas for starters. So, there's a lot of thinking, but it's an ambition. And we see, one of the core elements of circular economy is that keeping the value of resources in circulation for as long as possible. So you get maximum value, you move towards zero waste and minimum input to the cycle. That we try and shorten the supply chains, so that as far as possible, aspects of are sourced locally, or components are sourced locally. One of the things we saw during COVID, as I mentioned in my presentation, was the fact that many of the things we needed urgently were coming from a very long way away, and everybody wanted the same things at the same time. So there are huge elements of circularity that I think build sustainability, build resilience, and can grow the economy in the right way. We've got a number of initiatives underway, but perhaps one that came up in a comment someone else made, I think, about repairing. We're looking at things like repair cafes, maker spaces, and so on. We haven't got any of those, although there are some around Peterborough, in Cambridgeshire and in Lincolnshire, that were very successful. What we have developed is something called Share Peterborough, which is a platform for businesses and other organisations. If they have an item of equipment or office furniture or some spare capacity in a delivery vehicle, they can register that online, and others that are seeking office space or office furniture can basically be put in touch with those people. We don't get involved, it's automated, and the platform calculates in a very crude way at the moment, but it does calculate the social, environmental and economic benefit of each mini transaction, if you like. We need to get it better used, and we're working on that at the moment, but those sorts of things are at the heart of what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Trevor. If I could just comment, it was me that asked the question about makerspaces and repair cafes and such like, because it seems to me that that's one of the answers to this problem that people have with Industry 4.0, that it just seems to be yet more automation, taking yet more human capital out of the economy and replacing it with foreign-made machines, which isn't really terribly sustainable or what I would consider to be better. But one answer to it might be to use Industry 4.0 to enable remanufacturing, taking your stuff back to the factory after it's developed a fault or after it's become obsolete in some way. And also makerspaces are a great way of putting people back into the productive economy to help keep goods that we love but don't work anymore circulating. Yeah. But I know the big question is who's going to pay for all of this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just to pick up one point there, I mean, we focus on 7 R's as we call them, but one of them is about rethinking and redesign. So right at the front end of all of this, looking at your product, service, looking at the business model. The common example often used now, and I've used it, is that if you're building a new office block now, you can purchase not the light fittings but the light. So you specify that you need so many lumens in corridors, so many in offices, etc., etc., and the provider prices it by the lumen. They own the equipment if something breaks, so it's in their interest to make things last forever because they make more money that way. So rethinking some of the models, which is happening, that the making products that are easy to dismantle, easy to repair. So this right to repair legislation that's coming in will make a big impact, I'm sure. But you're right, there's many elements of that which I think feed into this resilience, building a resilient city. Yeah, and there's more opportunities for innovation as well when you start to look at things in that way. There's more challenges, more things to innovate.
Thank you.
Mohammed, you have got a question?
I can ask a question. Yeah, thanks, Trevor. Thanks, Trevor, Rebecca, Catherine. I think some really useful insights, very exciting. So I had a question, and I often wonder, obviously from first 2 presentations at least, I can see we have innovative solutions are there, and but the question is what it is which might stop cities to replicate and scale up, and what it is which makes different cities differ in their sustainability and low carbon journey. So if you look at different cities, some cities seem to be leading even in the UK, and some are in the middle of their journey, and some are quite at the back end. So what it is which makes a city differ in the low carbon journey, and what it is which stops cities to replicate, scale up all the innovative solutions Trevor, you and Rebecca talked about.
Okay, I'm happy to start that as someone that sort of works for a city in a way. In my experience, it boils down to leadership. That difference between cities. There are cities, and I'm not going to mention names or comment on Peterborough's particular performance, but there are cities which are way ahead of others on this. They've been focusing on, for example, climate change or smart city for years. But if I give you let me pick smart as an example. I don't, and I'm being honest with you here, I think Peterborough could have progressed much better and much quicker than it has done if it had embraced the opportunities that smart provided at an early stage. Bristol, that became a future city demonstrator at the same time as us, virtually restructured their whole council around the word smart. And there are cities that have done that around sustainability, around climate change. Whatever the core priority is, politically, and from the chief executive level, there's a clear direction, and once that direction is clear, everybody can innovate, provide services. They know very much that the priority is around to that goal. So I think it does boil down to leadership in a lot of these political. I know of one local authority, which I won't mention, that's not very far from where I sit, that doesn't fully accept that climate change exists. So you can imagine that the people that work in that council would not be suggesting cycling schemes, would not be suggesting that businesses reduce their carbon footprint particularly. It'll be in there, but it won't be a focal point for anybody that works in that council. And that comes from the political arena. The leader of the council and the cabinet don't see it as critical, as a critical focus for that authority. So there's bound to be differences between that and an authority that puts things like that at the very heart of everything it does.
Yeah, that's surprising. I think what I see then is I think the barriers, the challenges are more non-technical in nature, in order to replicate and scale up. So I think technology is there. It's about policy. It's about non-technical barriers. And I think just to build on that, I think Trevor, you mentioned quite a lot in your presentation, learning, sharing, and then Rebecca added on that collaboration. So do cities talk to each other? Do they communicate and collaborate, replicate, to share what works, what doesn't work, and how can we really scale up? Or what will be your advice for cities to share knowledge and learn on this journey?
Again, I'm happy to hand that over to others, but if I just comment very briefly, there is collaboration that goes on between cities and the sharing of learning. It's not always straightforward because there often isn't a single go-to place to find out best practice. You bump into it at a conference, or you see something in the news and you think, something's happening in Glasgow or Bristol or whatever. Let me find out more. So I think we could be better coordinated on that sharing. And there are many. Peterborough, through me, leads an initiative across Europe called the Small Giants, which is a network of small to medium-sized cities across Europe that are really trying to find a voice, because a lot of the government focus, a lot of financial support, a lot of academic research and so on tends to be focused on those big places, whereas actually those sorts of things that are being piloted in a big city could be transformational and change a whole city. But we have to wait for a pilot, and the thing developed for a big complex city doesn't work when you try and scale it down. So so that there are efforts underway and continue to be underway to sort of help cities collaborate better than they're currently doing. But it does happen.
Thank you, Trevor.
I'd like to jump in. So, I mean, I completely agree with everything that Trevor said around the leadership, but I also think context is massively important. So after more than 10 years of austerity, lots of local authorities lack the resources and the capacity to deliver this. A lot of them are also fighting fires in other areas. I don't mean, literal fires, but, energy and climate are non-statutory responsibilities for local authorities. The national targets that we have for delivering net zero are not devolved to regions or cities. And so, yes, in some places, local authorities are exhibiting strong leadership, but I honestly think that, unless you can align these really important national priorities with what local authorities are having to deal with on a day-to-day basis, which can often just be tackling massive housing crises, it can be very, very hard to get in the mindset of delivering these other things. So I agree, there may well be examples of very problematic areas where there is climate denial and so on. However, there are real challenges they're facing. And I think that where you see the really ambitious action is where local authorities have managed to align their energy and climate priorities and strategies with the other things that they are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, which they have statutory responsibilities to deliver against. So I think that that's really important context to remember. And so, you know, I feel like we need to get a better understanding of that, or, you know, shift in that kind of governance and accountability structures to really enable widespread action. And the other thing that I think is really, for me, been very interesting looking across the projects that are involved in the UK's Prospering from the Energy Revolution programme is that it is not local authorities acting alone. It is really exciting collaborative innovation ecosystems at the local level delivering place-based solutions. And I think that, you know, where that has happened successfully and the places where that's happening successfully, you know, that for me is a kind of a key to thinking about how you could roll these out and also support that integrated and shared learning in a more widespread environment.
Thank you all.
Mark, you raised your hand.
Yeah, just it's really just to take that Mohammed's question and Trevor and Rebecca's answers and put it to Catherine really, and take the example of Sunderland, which when I looked at your analysis, Sunderland was noticeably different from the overall trends, and obviously it's been in the news over the last couple of days with the battery. And so I suppose my question really is does that lead to potentially, does that sort of unique context lead to tensions elsewhere? Because the first thing that happens is everybody says it's great, Sunderland is benefiting, and then within, you know, a relatively short time you start talking about how much central government has put into that particular city. So it's really a question of, I suppose, what underpins those sort of contextual changes that you're suggesting for the North. You know, Northern Powerhouse might be another example, I suppose.
So as I understand your question right, whether like one company which is so powerful like Nissan can actually make the difference in the North. So I think Sunderland is an interesting example, and I think we use it very often to actually bring also our point. I mean, are the people in Sunderland really benefiting from Nissan there? I'm not really sure. When we look at a range of different indicators, we can still see there are like high shares of like rather low skilled people. Their business stock is really low, etc. And what is also very important to keep in mind for Sunderland, Nissan has like not only the plant in Sunderland, it has also like other offices or so where like actually much more productive work is taking place. So I think all the knowledge work we would consider to be beneficial for the economy, with all these high knowledge jobs, they're actually not in Sunderland. They are all like in Paddington, I think in Milton Keynes or Reading. So I think the biggest part, it's not there. So I mean, for sure, Sunderland is lucky to have Nissan, and it makes a difference. But I think to level up, we would still say that Sunderland is not there yet. It must be leveled up. And I think it's always very, I don't know, critical if like one place is dependent on like one big employer, because we can see, or we saw in the past, like with all the Brexit discussions, how fast this can go, then actually the fortunes may be going away or go elsewhere when it's so much dependency on one employer. So and yeah, when we look at the other indicators, it's critical when it comes to business startups, almost not existing in Sunderland. The business stock is very low. The only thing which is good is the GDP per worker. So that's not helpful yet. So for a place like Sunderland, we would recommend to invest in skills first and to make this place really more attractive for high value production to settle there.
Could I just expand the question then and almost reverse it to say, well, let's take somewhere close to Trevor, let's say somewhere like Cambridge, which will comply with the model of a successful city, but actually service sector workers can't afford houses, and a lot of the southeast, which you highlighted as you know, having these productive cities, within those they have huge, you know, it's almost as if deprivation in a wealthy area is more acute than deprivation in a poor area. So how does your analysis take that
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned this. I mean, to be honest, when we look at Cambridge and Oxford, we rather see the positives, because on a large scale of indicators, these cities are performing very well. But we recently did a study on the fast growth cities. Peterborough is one of them, which was basically looking, okay, how to handle or what problems are facing those places which are already successful. And for Cambridge particularly, and Oxford as well, it is exactly as you mentioned, like low-skilled people who are actually doing all the service work for the high-skilled people are crowded out and don't find space anymore. And so for these places, the problem is mostly that they don't have the power about the transport system, or like they are not in charge of the housing because the people live somewhere else. And I think for us at the Center for Cities, the only solution which can be is more devolution of exactly these things to entities which are covering the functional economic area and not only Cambridge local authority, because we know the reach of these places is much more far away. So particularly for fast growth or high growth places, the only thing which must happen is like more devolution, giving more powers, and consequently giving them the right to organize or to structure transport, housing, etc. But we do not really, we hardly look at the pockets of these people which are low skilled in Cambridge, or like which is disadvantaged. I mean, for sure they are there, but I mean, when we look at the rest of the UK, there are places which are basically, I don't know, there's so many low-skilled people or issues, then it's more important to focus on there. But I think another thing is like why I mentioned or was like putting such a strong emphasis on Birmingham and Manchester is that I think this is all coming together. So I'm German, and for instance, in Germany, we don't have one area where all the economic power is. So we have like strong cities in the north, we have strong cities in the west, etc. And they give good jobs to the hinterland. So all the economic power, etc. here is like concentrated in the southeast. And this is what we need to achieve, is actually focusing away this strong emphasis on the southeast, or like not even distributed, but try to make other places also equally successful, so that high-skilled workers think, okay, I can equally find a very well-paid job in Manchester, so I don't need to live in a suburb of Cambridge and block everything. So I think this is why trying to achieve high productivity levels and get the jobs or the good jobs to Manchester and Birmingham, and to get these cities more productive, will be then help also like level up the entire economy.
That's great. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I think there is another question about the GDP, whether GDP is a good measure of productivity or can be used for measuring, and there is also, I think Daniel and Rick, both of you have asked about that. So can you, either of you could raise the issue, please?
Yeah, I mean, I know there's always a lot of discussion about indicators, etc. I mean, this is why I was not referring, when it comes to building back better, exclusively to productivity, but also like skills, which is basically an indicator in telling us how possible it is that a person can participate in a high-skilled labor market where it would get like, or the person would get a higher wages, as well as health, which is also like related to the overall well-being. So I think we're looking at these indicators, but I think the point I try to make is that we need to look at productivity if we want to compare the UK with other countries, as well as the performance within the country, because we know the more productive a place is, the better paid the people are, and the more money they have, the more they demand also local services. So they also support people in jobs which are not really in productive industries, etc., because just for demanding the services, I mean, we can see how much the fortunes, or like the existence of those jobs, can actually change the fortunes of these local service workers, when we look at the impact of the crisis on central London or like central Manchester, where all the office workers, which would normally go to cafes in their lunch break, demand like restaurants after work, etc., we're not there anymore. I mean, the people suffering from exactly this were the people working in central London. And I think this is just like in a nutshell, what is going on actually everywhere where we have these high skilled workers concentrated. So I think productivity is still the best indicator to measure this. For sure, when it comes to sustainability, one can also include something on CO2, etc. But as we are mostly focused now on economic impacts and how we can level up the UK or the cities, when it comes to productive businesses, I still perceive it as the best indicator to choose.
Okay, no, that's very good. I think yeah, yeah, Rick, you want to say something?
No, that's okay. I just want to say thank you to Catherine for the answer.
Yeah.
Obviously, the issue of GDP is an old question, but particularly if it's about building back better, it seems that we need something else appropriate to the task, really.
Yeah, but the UK is really lagging behind. There's a large productivity gap, and for us, building back better is to bring UK back on track. I mean, this is why it's still so important. And I mean, yeah, I think if we were not an economic think tank, we would probably consider in building back better more environmental indicators. But for us, people need to have good jobs and they need to get the demand for their services. And this you just get with like more productive businesses.
Okay, Letitia, you have got one question. Do you want to go ahead?
No, it was, I think, very much related to what Rick and Mark were questioning before. It was related with if the GDP or productivity was measured in the cities with in relation with the high tech or high value added that they produce in the city. So it may depend a lot in the business sectors, and perhaps that's happening with Birmingham and Manchester. But so it's not recommendable to move towards those high tech like Industry 4.0, or will that make productivity better? Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, we have seen 3 presentations from 3 different angles, but I think there is a common theme that is running through all of them. Engagement is one of the aspects, local level of interactions, local investments, and an integrated approach of interventions. I think that's what has come through these discussions, because that is what the Sustainable Development Goals, they have also tried to do, kind of thinking broadly about what the interactions could be. So doing things better could also mean that we integrate those as wider aspects as well for this social and environmental benefits, rather than only focusing on one aspect of it. So that I think is going through the entire discussion and entire all the presentations that we have heard. And the idea of again, that change, as well as bringing and linking with the maybe the local city level governance. I think that is again something which is going to play an important role in the recovery process, because unless we deliver the we have got a clear idea about what we are going to do and how we deliver it, and have a clear leadership role in that, then this leveling up or integration of sustainable development themes with the interventions that won't happen. And that's where I think everybody involved in this process could be playing a role there, because again, there is a lot of fluidity in the process at the moment, because nothing is cast in stone. So there is always the potential for local level engagement and identification of priorities at the local level, so that they can make the choices for themselves which works better for them, and then develop relevant skills as well as maybe the ecosystem that is required to deliver it. And that's where all these issues would be going back. And there is no, perhaps there's no single solution for everybody. So everybody has to start working, linking and networking with each other, and see how the best practices could be utilized better for the overall benefits of the society. And this pandemic has given that opportunity to think differently and maybe bring certain changes rapidly that perhaps would not have happened otherwise. So I think that with that positive note, I think we stop the panel discussion, and thank you all the panelists as well as all the questions and the entire audience for your participation. Thank you very much for your time and for your excellent presentations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Yeah, and I think, and we will, this is the end of the conference as well, because we have there is nothing more in the second half of the presentation of the conference today. So we will end it here, and I will share the proceedings as well with all of you. If you can leave your presentations with me, you can send it to me afterwards as well, so that I can compile a document and create a PDF file so that we can share it with the rest of the world also. And there will be a summary of the presentations today, and yeah, we will compile and we'll also post our video records in YouTube as well as other social media platforms. So thank you very much for participation, and I think we had a nice day today discussing about various aspects, from technical academic presentations to more lively discussions and participation in the overall recovery and post-pandemic outcome as outlook as well. So thank you all, and I declare this event for today now to be closed. You can still continue networking, that's open if you want. I will keep the platform open for some more time, but yeah, you have the opportunity to sharing it with and networking with each other. Rick, before we go, if you want to raise your hand, so
thanks, Sebas. It's really just a question. I sort of took my hand down previously because I thought we haven't got time for this, but if we have, does anybody feel able to comment on the idea of the Preston model? I say this because my wife comes from Preston. That's and I've been reading the Preston model of local authority procurement, which obviously served before the pandemic, but it seems particularly relevant now in terms of stimulating a local economy and possibly to build back better. I wondered if anybody had any comments on that from your perspectives.
I can comment very briefly, because it is a model I know, and we have looked at it locally. It plays very strongly into the circular economy arena, and particularly as local authorities are often the biggest procurer of products and services in their area. And going back to what I said about the length and complexity of supply chains, the requirements certainly under EU directives and so on is that local authorities have to advertise contracts above a certain level, but they have to advertise them widely across Europe. Obviously, those rules will be changing or have changed. So there is an ability which hasn't been applied before for local authorities to give priority to local businesses. Bizarrely, that hasn't always been the case, because in the days of terms like best value, which still exists, but it was a legal term at one time, you had to demonstrate best value, and that meant if somebody in Cheltenham could produce something for 25% less than they could half a mile down the road, you had a great difficulty in demonstrating that that was better value, because it predominantly went around the cost of the product, and didn't really take into account anything about local provision, local environmental and economic impacts. So I think there is a shift towards that, and I think councils like Preston are pushing the boundary. It sounds like an obvious thing to do, but in the local authority world, pushing the boundary where you give priority to your local businesses hasn't been something that's been easy to do in the past.
Thank you. That's really interesting. So just to follow on from that, what changed? How did this legal obligation get watered down or get tempered in some way?
Well, as I say, the big change will be, I'm not quite sure what status it's at, but the requirements, the EU requirements will obviously be loosened. But I think it was pushing that boundary. There was talk earlier about, and I think I mentioned it, around businesses, risk aversity, cautiousness, and so on. But the fact that we want to learn from failure. In actual fact, local authorities, because of their reduced resources, which other speakers have referred to, failure can be costly in financial terms. And so local authorities more and more, in my view, are becoming risk averse and around trying new things that are not proven elsewhere. I think Preston are pushing the boundary here and saying, let's see if anyone challenges this, because it makes absolute common sense. It makes economic and environmental sense and social sense that we look after and support local business. So who's going to argue with that? In the past, I think there's been nervousness that, well, the company in Cheltenham will challenge it and we'll have to go to court and we'll lose it and we'll have to award it to the company in Cheltenham. I think Preston are sort of saying, no, we're going to fight for this. And I don't think anybody will challenge it. I think it makes absolute sense.
Thank you. That's really encouraging. Thanks.
Okay. So, yeah. Trevor, you want to say something?
No.
No? Okay, good. Okay, that's good. Okay, so I think we come to an end to this conference now, and I'll declare it now officially closed. And yeah. Again, if you want to stay and network, that's fine. I will leave the platform open for some more time, but that's officially now the presentations and the discussions are over. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining.
The conference.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.